Welcome to the Abundance Code, the podcast where we delve into the secrets of unlocking abundance in mind, money, and meaning. I'm your host, Jason Stanley. So forget what society is telling you. Forget the nonsense that society says is reasonable and start to become unreasonable. Back to the Abundance Code, where we discuss mind, money, and meaning. I'm Jason Stanley. So last time we talked about a couple different things. We talked about goal setting. We talked about, how you talk about things that you're wanting to accomplish. The last time we got together, we talked about the language that we use, how our words can bring about reality. And it's not a mystical, weird thing. It's not this thing of I'm going to speak, say that there's a little elf over here and all of a sudden a little elf's going to appear. It's how we use our words that basically open our minds up to be able to accomplish certain things, right? And so that's what we talked about last time. But what I want to talk to you guys about today is this idea of being unreasonable, right? It's something that I've used in my life. It's something that I continue to use in my life. It's a behavior that I choose to engage in on a regular basis. And I don't mean be unreasonable with your spouse. I don't mean be unreasonable with your kids or the people around you. I don't mean being, a jerk, right? But being unreasonable in your expectations. Be unreasonable in what you expect or what you think can happen. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, I think it's best to start with a story, right? So most people know who Richard Branson is, right? And a lot of people know he has his own private island called Necker Island. It's actually a very large destination for high net worth individuals. He hosts a lot of different things there and that kind of stuff. And so when you hear that, most people think that, God, that must have cost him a lot of money. And, after all, he's a billionaire, so it probably cost him millions and millions of dollars to buy it. But the thing is he actually got it super cheap. And when I say super cheap, I mean very cheap, by simply being unreasonable. Now, he did it on accident. It's kind of a funny story. So the story goes that he was trying to show off for her girl he was dating, right? So I don't know why he was doing that. Guys never do that, right? I've never tried to show off for a girl I was dating. I'm lying. But he was trying to show off for this girl that he was dating, and he had seen this listing for this island. They had listed it, I think, for like $6 million. And he sent a formal offer for $100,000. And what happened was the owner didn't immediately reject the offer, which was interesting. So thus began this back and forth of negotiations. And a year later, he ends up buying Necker Island for $180,000. Remember, it was listed for $6 million. $180,000. Now, people will tell you all the time. I've had real estate agents do this to me. Oh, they'll never take that, right? That's unreasonable. But he just bought an island for $180,000. That was listed for $6 million. So do you think that being unreasonable might have been okay in that situation? Absolutely. So don't let yourself fall victim to what society and what people around you tell you is reasonable. Reasonable is only relative to whoever you're dealing with or negotiating with. And whatever it is in your life, right? And so he bought this island for $180,000. I think he put like $10 million worth of work into it and built some really nice facilities on it and that kind of stuff. And now it's this big tourist type destination, right? It doesn't hold a whole lot of people. I think it's like 700 acres. But he has people there on a regular basis. He charges them to come there, and he's probably made back what he's invested. I don't have that down. I don't know that for certain, but I'm guessing he has. But I love that story because it goes against everything that we're told, right? We're always told what everything has to be, right? When you're negotiating, well, only ask for this or only do these things. And we put all these stipulations around what we believe is reasonable. And the reality is, sometimes being unreasonable will get us things far easier, far better than what we could ever thought before, right? Being unreasonable sometimes will help you spur your team to accomplish things they didn't know were able to be accomplished. Probably one of the best examples of an unreasonable CEO is Steve Jobs, right? I mean, how many stories have you heard about Steve Jobs where he sounded completely unreasonable in terms of what he wanted, how he saw the iPhone, how he saw the iPod, all these different things working, how he wanted the interfaces to work, how he didn't want a fan in the first computer to cool the electronics because he didn't like the noise that it made, right? And everybody said, oh, that's unreasonable. But he stuck to his guns and he accomplished great things because of it. He got his team to accomplish amazing feats, things that they didn't even think were possible. Henry Ford's another great example, right? He wanted a V6 engine, as I recall, right? And they kept telling him, it's not possible, it's not reasonable, you can't do it. And he said, whether you believe you can or you cannot, either way, you're correct. And he pushed his team. And guess what? They did it, right? So being unreasonable in certain ways in your life can help you accomplish great things. So I'll give you an example of how I've done this in my own life, right? Again, everything that we talk about, I always want to highlight how I've used this. So you see real world examples of this. Most recently in my life, I was purchasing a new aircraft. And it was in May of last year. I actually put the offer on it in February. And, the shop that I have my aircraft maintained at, the owner of the shop has become a good friend of mine. And he helps me out a lot with different stuff on my aircraft and stuff. And I have helped him with different things. But we communicate on a regular basis. And he called me and he said, hey, I know you're looking for this type of airplane. He said, I just got one here in my shop that's for sale. And let me tell you, this is a great aircraft. He said, there's a few things that you're going to have to take care of once you get it. But the most important part of any aircraft is almost always the engine, right? And that's the most costly to work on. And he said, the engine is phenomenal. He's like, it's so clean. I can still read the serial numbers on some of the components inside the engine. And he said, I said, well, what do you think I should offer? And he said, well, if you offer X for it, right, and you offer this amount for it, they're going to take it. And I said, okay. He said, but you need to come here and see it. He was really, he believed in the airplane, and I believed in him so much that I wasn't worried about seeing it. He said, well, you need to come here and see it. And I said, well, right now, it is one of those busy times in my life, right? Like we talked about last time. And I said, I'm not going to be able to get over there for about a month. All right. And I just had a lot going on. I just literally did not have the time to be able to squeeze that into my schedule because it's a little bit of a trip out there to where the shop is. It's not just right around the corner. And so I called the people who had it listed and I wrote an offer on it. Now, this is an aircraft, number one, that typically would go for north of $1 million, usually about $1.2 million. So I was going to be able to acquire this for less than that. I was going to pay cash for it. But I had an event that was happening, right? I had some assets that were settling out to where the money was going to come from, and it hadn't happened just yet. So I needed to buy myself a little bit of time. And so the offer that I wrote was for $5,000 down. So I gave him $5,000, non-refundable, in order to take control of this asset. And I said $5,000 close in 30 days. And now again, I didn't know for sure that the assets that I had coming due were going to actually happen. Right. I believed that was going to happen. I worked hard at it and it was all there. All the components were there, but I didn't know how long it was actually going to take to come to fruition. So at the end of it, if I didn't have the money, how much did it cost me? Well, it was going to cost me $5,000, right? Which in the grand scheme of things isn't a lot of money, but Here's the unreasonable part about all this, right? The offer that I wrote, the reason that it was so unreasonable is the fact that I said, here's $5,000. And oh yeah, if the shop finds something that's, deemed horribly wrong with the aircraft, damning to the aircraft, I don't have to buy it. I don't have to pay for the work the shop is doing. So anything the shop is doing, you're authorizing, you're taking that on. If we get to the end of the road and I don't have the money to buy this from you, I walk away. You keep my $5,000. And so on the surface, that sounds like an okay offer. The reality is, in normal conditions, in order for you to take control of an asset like that, an aircraft specifically, a minimum of 10% is what you have to put down. So in that case, we would have been talking close to $100,000, $120,000, or $100,000, close to it, that I would have had to put down in earnest money on this airplane, and I probably would have had to take on the expenses associated with the maintenance that they were doing on it. Right? Instead, I was unreasonable. I said, with a lot of confidence, I called the broker and I said, "Hey, here you go. Here's what I'll do. If you'll work with me on this, here's what your buyer will get." Right? And I said it with so much confidence, and I gave it to them with so much confidence that they wrote the offer, that they accepted it. They wrote it. We put it in escrow, and that kind of stuff. We got to the end of 30 days. I wasn't ready to close. Fortunately, right? Like I said, the owner of the shop is a good friend of mine. We were able to work together, and I got him just to kind of slow some processes down for me, right? But they didn't come back and ask and say, "Hey, why aren't you closing on this date?" No, because they wanted to get the deal done, right? And the result was I got a wonderful aircraft that I get to fly around with my family in. It's a terrific airplane. Cosmetically, I've had to do a few little things to it. But I got something that should have been valued way higher for a lot less than what it should be valued. I got an aircraft that's really good quality and that kind of stuff by being unreasonable. I, at that time, didn't have $100,000 liquid cash just to put down in earnest money. So I put down $5,000, right? And so that's a good example of how being unreasonable, right? Anybody else, any broker, any buyer's agent that I would have talked to during that time would have said, "Oh, well, we need to put 10% down." Right? And these are people that are supposed to work for you. Your real estate agent, all these people are supposed to work for you, right? And their version of reasonableness is what society says is reasonable. Hey, 10% down or 20% down on a house and that kind of stuff. I've been able to buy assets a lot of times in my life without having to come out of pocket anything. There's numerous times where I've put money into something or taken control of an asset without ever having to come out of pocket for it, simply by being unreasonable, right? And so in your business, if you have a team, right, how can you be unreasonable there? What does that accomplish for you, right? You need to be careful. You don't want to be a jerk to your team. You don't want to be an ass to your team, right? You want to encourage them. You want to put time frames in place and push them to accomplish something, right? And I'll give you an example of that. Here recently, we had a situation where one of our offices in another state had a problem with registrations. Now, this isn't something that can generally easily be remedied, right? It takes time because you're talking about governments, governmental agencies, state government, federal government agencies, that kind of stuff. And so I had called my team and I put them on it. And I said, "Hey, we need to get this accomplished within 24 to 48 hours, And at first they pushed back and said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Get to work on it. I know you can do it," right? And it was very important that it get done in the shortest amount of time possible. Reality said that it was going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. In fact, I called my business partner, and you know what he said? He's like, "Oh, that's going to take a couple weeks." And I said, "No, I bet you it gets done in 24 to 48 hours. He said, "All right, you're on. And I said, all right, if I'm right, you owe me, right? And I think I bet him a bottle of scotch or something like that. And so the reality is it took 72 hours. It was done in 72 hours. But it did not take a couple weeks. So what was the difference between a couple weeks and 72 hours? Well, it's a lot. And in business, it was a lot of money, right? Because it now meant that we were earning money faster than we had been on the other side. We weren't losing money anymore. But how were they able to get that done so quickly? Well, I think it was simply the fact that I was a bit unreasonable and that I said that I had the confidence in them to be able to accomplish it. And it took a lot of work on their part to get it done. It took a lot of phone calls, took a lot of pushing and that kind of stuff. You've always heard it, right? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So sometimes being unreasonable, right, means being that squeaky wheel. Pushing for things to be accomplished a lot faster than what people believe they can be accomplished. Again, I think Steve Jobs is one of the great examples of being able to push people to accomplish those things. Right? So think about it. Be unreasonable with yourself. Be unreasonable with the goals that you set. We talked about goal setting and that kind of stuff. And remember I said you have to believe it before you can see it. And a lot of times we put these boxes around ourselves of what we believe is reasonable. And what I'm encouraging you to do is start pushing against what you believe is reasonable, what you believe is possible, and push yourself to do something more, right? If you're buying a house, write an offer that's absurd. Worst case scenario, they say no, and you write a different offer, right? Trust me, if you meet their price, they're going to sell it to you. You never know what they're going to, where somebody's going to land. There's nothing that is off the table. Everything is negotiable, right? When you really think about it, everything can be negotiated. And sometimes people are in a position in their lives where they're willing to part with something because they either want it off their balance sheet, they either want it out of their life or something for ungodly low amounts of money, right? And so when we're talking about assets, so I love that story of Richard Branson and buying the island for $180,000. And consequently, after I read that story, I started going out and looking at islands and going, I wonder if I could do that. I don't really have a desire to own an island, but it's a great example of how being unreasonable really can get you a lot further in life than people who believe in this idea of reasonableness, right? Saying, oh, well, you have to do these things when you're trying to buy an asset. You have to offer this kind of money. You have to put this kind of money down, or, you have to expect these kind of returns, or with your team, well, the time frames to accomplish something. Time frames to accomplish things, generally speaking, can be condensed down really quickly. It just depends on how much pressure you put on a situation. And so, think about how you can incorporate that into your goals. Think about how you can incorporate that into the words that you use, like we talked about last time, of being unreasonable, right? So when you start to ignore what people are telling you is possible, and you start to do what you know you can probably get accomplished, and you believe in it, right? If you're passionate about it, you'll drive it, right? I told you whenever I started buying that aircraft, one of the things that I did was I called that broker, and with a ton of confidence, right? And just directness, I made my offer, right? And it was enough that it persuaded the broker to go to his buyer and say, hey, we should take this offer. And consequently, the other part that I didn't talk about was they actually had another offer on the aircraft. They actually had another offer. My offer was better in the long term, right? But the risk that they took to get that better offer was higher. So they could have taken the other guy's offer, gotten a fair value for it. They would not have made as much money, but they also would not have taken on the risk, right? With me, they took on risk. They took on the risk of, I could walk away. At the end of the deal, at the end of 30 days, I could walk away and I would have lost my $5,000. But at the end of the day, $5,000 is not a lot when we're talking about that type of asset. And so, I was willing to take the risk myself. They were willing to take the risk with me. And as a result, they got better money on what they were asking for. And I got a better deal on the aircraft than what I could have gotten otherwise. And I was able to actually get that away from somebody else. So, it's pretty neat when you start to see how these things can work in your life, right? Again, it comes back down to your language. What kind of language do you use, right? Had I looked at that aircraft and said, well, I can't afford that, right? I would have immediately shut that down. Had when the owner of the shop called and said, hey, I know you're interested in one of these aircraft. Here's how much you can get it for. Had I said, well, I don't have the money right now. I can't afford it. I would immediately shut off the possibility of being able to do that, right? The result was I had something that was coming up. I knew that it was likely to happen, right? And I was willing to take on the risk, right? In business, oftentimes, I have been early on in my career. I started as a financial advisor. I was meeting with this guy, and I had uncovered an error in his accounting that meant that they were going to have to go back and amend 5 years of tax returns, or they were going to have to get the company that they worked with to get them to fix it. And I told him with a ton of confidence, I said, move these things to me, let me take control of these accounts, and I'll get that company to fix it. I didn't know if they'd do it. I had no clue if they would actually fix this for free, right? Because they wanted to charge the client. They wanted to charge the client a lot of money to fix it, right? So either he's going to have to pay this company a lot of money or he's going to have them in 5 years of returns. Both situations were expensive. I didn't know 100% if I could do it. I said it with confidence. I was being unreasonable. And I said, I'm going to figure out a way to accomplish it. And I actually had reserved myself to say, if I can't get them to pay for it, I may have to figure out a way to pay for this myself. And so, but I didn't want to even go down that road. So I just focused on it. I made all the phone calls. I got up to one of the upper level managements of the company that we were talking about. And I explained the situation. And he said, absolutely, we will fix that. And in turn, what being unreasonable in that situation did, I got a call from this guy's CPA shortly thereafter. And he called me and said, hey, I'd like to meet you. And I thought, oh, crap. I just pissed somebody off. This is not good. I've stepped on somebody's toes. I've overstepped my bounds. I immediately went to the worst case scenario. And I do that in my life. So I don't want you to think that I'm always always positive and stuff like that. I do generally I try not to, but my mind immediately in the situation a lot of times will go to worst case scenarios. So I thought, oh crap, this is it. This is where my life ends. This is where where I go bankrupt in my business and all this other stuff. And instead, what this guy said was, hey, I'm this person's CPA. I've never seen anybody be this thorough before. You just uncovered an error that had been going on for 5 years that even my team missed, and my team is really good. He said, I want to meet you. And I said, well, okay. And so we start talking, and turns out he's into airplanes as well. He flies airplanes. And so we had that in common. So we start talking. He comes down and he meets me. He flies down from Dallas. I live just outside of Austin. And so he flies down from Dallas in his plane. We sit down. And I realized in that moment, this person is somebody I need to have in my life. Number one, he was older. He had been very successful in what he did. And he had connections, and I was trying to build my business. And so we met. I end up grabbing on to him. I went up to Dallas one day. I said, hey, I've got some meetings up here. I'm going to stop by and say hi to you. And he said, okay. I ended up spending the whole day with him. He ends up becoming one of my mentors in life. And single-handedly changed the direction of my life and my business because of what he did. And it all came because I was unreasonable in believing that I could fix something that everybody else said was going to cost money, that everybody else said was not possible, right? I was unreasonable in that. And the result was not only did I get a client out of it, I got something that's even more valuable, or, I can't even put a dollar amount on it. I got one of the best mentors in my life, right? A guy named Bill Caton, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying his name on this thing. But Bill has been instrumental in my life. I love him like a father. He's been an amazing human being to me. Ironically, I ended up buying my first airplane from him as well. So it's amazing where life can take you when you start to be unreasonable with stuff, and who you will bring into your life. I'll springboard that into the next story about being unreasonable. Bill, he came into town, and we were driving down the road, and he points over to this neighborhood, and he said, "Hey, that's a country club community. You need to go join it, because the people who have money that you need to be working with are there." And I said, "Bill, I can't afford it." And he said, "You can't afford not to." And I thought, okay. And so he kind of laid down the gauntlet on me. And so I called the club, and I said, "Hey, what's it cost to join out there?" $65,000 initiation. And I was like, well, that ain't happening. Remember, this is when I'm first starting off, right? I'm just starting my business. I am going paycheck to paycheck. I am running wide open. I am negotiating with credit card companies to make payments on my credit cards, because my wife and I at the time just didn't have the money, right? But I decided not to stop pushing. And so I called the club again. I said, "Hey, look," I said, "I want to join. I love the club." And this was right around the time, 2009, 2010 timeframe. We just come out of a pretty deep recession. I knew their membership wasn't growing, and they needed members. And what country clubs, I was smart enough to understand that country clubs need your monthly dues more so than need your upfront money. The upfront initiation fee is nice. That kind of weeds out a lot of people from coming in because they want to keep the level high, the standards high. But they needed the monthly dues. And so I knew that was important to them. So I called the manager of the club then. And I said, "Look," I said, "I really want to join." I said, "Could we do 40,000 instead of 65,000?" And she said, "Yeah, we can." I said, "Great. Can we do it on a 3-year payment plan?" And she said, "Well, I'll have to go ask, and we don't normally do that and stuff." And I said, "Well, look," I said, "if you'll work with me," I said, "I want to join, and that's what I can do." And so I get a call back, and she said, "Absolutely, we'll do it." So I actually ended up paying it off in 2 years, and it ended up being the best decision that I ever made. I now live in the community that I've been talking about. I now live here. When I first joined out here, I had no business being out here. I didn't have anywhere near the money that most people had out here, and I definitely was robbing Peter to pay Paul in order to make the dues. But it put me in front of the people that I needed to be talking to in order to grow my business. Right? It took me out of my comfort zone, put me into a world with the people that could help grab me by the hand and take me forward. And again, all of that started because of one meeting that I had where I was unreasonable with my expectations of what I thought I could accomplish and what I thought I could negotiate and persuade a Fortune 500 company to do. Right? And so, everything that I do, I try to be a little bit unreasonable in. Unreasonable with myself, unreasonable with the expectations that I set. Not, being a jerk to the people around me, not being rude to people around me, but encouraging them, pushing them to achieve things in time frames and do things that they didn't think were possible. Right? And doing the same thing with myself. And so I would encourage you as you're looking at stuff, whether you're looking to buy a new home for yourself, or you're looking to buy an asset, or you're trying to get clients and that type of thing, be unreasonable in your expectations. Tell yourself that story remind yourself of the story of Richard Branson, who bought an island, private island for $180,000. So, if my stories help you, great. Remember, the words that we use are very important. How you say things. When you start saying things like, I can't afford it. And if you heard that story a second ago, I did. I said, I can't afford to join that country club. And soon as I shifted how I said that, and soon as I changed that and jettisoned that out of my vocabulary, and I started calling that club and started negotiating with them, I was able to join. And the fact of the matter is that particular event, those three stories combined, changed the trajectory of my business entirely. I mean, when I say changed it entirely, it made me very successful. And it put me in touch with people that are very successful. And, I have wonderful friendships and relationships out of it. I've gotten to do things in my life that people could only dream of being able to do, whether it's being invited to go on a private yacht in the Greek Isles with a friend of mine that I met from the club, or something along those lines. It's all kinds of things that start to open themselves up to you when you start to become unreasonable. So forget what society is telling you. Forget the nonsense that society says is reasonable, and start to become unreasonable, right? Like I told you last time, change the way you say things. You go up to people and you talk to them at a party. Hey, I've got more than enough time to do the things that are important to me. People will think you're crazy, right? Majority of people will think you're crazy. People who are very successful won't think you're crazy. They completely understand what you're doing. But most people think you're crazy. And people think you're even crazier when you start throwing out offers, when you start throwing out things in an unreasonable request. And especially if you make them happen, they're just going to stand there just stupefied as to how you accomplish these things. So in the meantime, as I've always said to you guys, continue to buck the status quo in order to grow. I hope you enjoyed today, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care.